to the Presbyterian missionaries on the Laurel Valley. And he went specifically to see Miss Frances Goodrich in Allenstown, where she had lined up some singers that were going to sing these songs that had been passed down by the oral tradition forever and ever. So he showed up, and one of the women that showed up was Chris Sands' grandmother, Mary Sands, Mary Bowman Sands. And he was not prepared for the way she sang. She sang 6 ballads for him that day, and they were long and complex ones. She had to sing them over and over and over again because they didn't have tape recorders. You know, they were trying to note it out as he did come over. He wasn't kind of a crippled Englishman, but you know, if you're going to travel, it's better to travel with a 21-year-old beautiful secretary, and that's what he did. she would write down stuff, he would write down stuff. Anyway, they went through 6 songs that day. And he says, this first graders is what he called them in his diary. And he said, well, can you come back tomorrow? He said, well, I reckon I could, you know. So she came back to Allenstown the next day, and she sang 6 more songs for him that day. Took all day for him to take it down. And then he says, well, you know, you think you could come back again tomorrow? I said, I know you know lots more songs. Oh, yeah, I know lots of songs. He said, but I don't think I can come back tomorrow because how many of you saw the movie Songcatcher? You see that? Great movie, isn't it? Right? You know, a lot of my friends are in that movie. I was not in it because I had to pay taxes on that money. You know, in this story, this little girl, she's like a 15-year-old Jewish girl from New York that's in the mountains, and she knows all these songs, and she sings them all in there so beautifully. And Sheila K. Adams coached her to sing those songs. Well, I think that was Mary Sands. But the thing is that Mary Sands was not a 15-year-old girl. Mary Sands was 45 years old, and she was 8.5 months pregnant with her 10th child. And to beat that, she lived 4.5 miles away. So she walked that distance, there and back, every day to sing for him.
What month was it?
It was in July. Guess what else happened in July? Every road in the world washed plumb away. The great flood, the 500-year flood. It was difficult getting around. He had to be carried in what they call a Joe cart, which is a donkey cart, from place to place. Oh, he was really incensed with that kind of travel and how but he did say that the people who lived here were quite like English peasants. We couldn't read or write, and make any Peasant, pheasant, who knows? And she said, I can't come back tomorrow. She said, I've got 9 children and a husband at home. She said, we've got a little bit of garden stuff, and we've got to put up what we can have to make it through the winter. If you want to hear me, you've got to come where I live. Well, that was out of the question for him. He was crippled. So she went home that night. The next morning, she was out in her garden hoeing. She heard the dog bark, and she looked, and by God, there was that little crippled Englishman and his secretary coming up the path to the house. And she said, well, if you want to hear me sing, you might slip down. You've got to follow me around because I've got to do my work today. I can't just do this all the time, sing. So he did. He followed her around. She sang 4 more songs for him that day. He said, oh, please, Mrs. Sands, could you just meet us down at White Rock? He said, that's kind of halfway tomorrow. Because I'm going to be staying down there at the hospital because I don't feel too good. And she felt sorry for him and said, yeah, I will. And she had one of her boys walking back down there to White Rock. The next day, she went down there and she sang 4 more songs for him. She went back home and said, can you please come back tomorrow? I said, no, I can't come back tomorrow. We've got things to do. If you want to hear me, you got to come home. By that time, that was Thursday, and Friday, going to be Friday. And she didn't expect to see him again. But lo and behold, about 9 o'clock, who shows up? Here he comes. His little pad of paper, and he follows her around all day while she's doing her work and writes these songs down. Just lovely, lovely songs. That had a wonderful, beautiful voice that stayed with him as long as he lived. When they finished that day, he shook her hand and he gave her $5. And he says, I've got to be in Chicago next week to give a lecture. And they're going to try to get me to Hot Springs where I think I can get the train to Knoxville and go. So it's been such a great pleasure to hear you sing for me. And they shook hands and parted, thinking they'd never see each other again. But about 9 o'clock the next morning, the dog started barking, and here come that little son of a gun again. Miss Carp was right behind him, carrying his stuff, and she sang 4 more songs for him that day. At the end of that day, they did shake hands and part, never to meet again. But I believe that there was a bond between those two people that was stronger than oceans. The very first song I sang for you tonight, Pretty Sarah, was the first song that Mary Sands sang for Cecil Sharp on that Saturday morning. And I'd like for you now, if we may, we'll sing the very last song that she ever sang. And we'll bid you a wonderful good night. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you for letting me be here in my hometown to this beautiful crowd. Thank you. I never do this, but I want to do it. I'm sniffling and snorting. I don't know which one, because I'm crying or I'm allergic to what Chris has on. Until my dying day, when you're on some distant shore, think on your absent friend. When the wind blows high and clear, a line to praise in. And when the wind blows high and clear, praise and love to me, so I might know by your handwriting how times is gone with thee. So my dearest dear, the time draws near when you and I must part. No one knows the inner griefs of my breaking heart, or what I've suffered for your sake, the one I love so dear. Yes, I wish that I could go with you, or that you might tarry here. Yes, I wish that I could go with you, or that you might tarry